Hello there, World of Tankers. Welcome to the channel. Hopefully all of you are doing well out there, as I'm, of course, your host, Untitled Blitz, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the AP, APCR, HE, and Heat shells in World of Tanks Blitz, the different characteristics and values they have, and how the penetration values work in the game, because, of course, this is something a lot of people don't understand, how AP sometimes penetrates better than Heat does, even if Heat has a higher base penetration value, and it's something I, of course, love to talk about. So as you can see here, we are looking at the tier 10 French heavy tank, the AMX MLE 54. Now this is a very strong vehicle. It's got high alpha, great mobility, and very strong frontal armor. And of course, we are up against an IS-4, which is another extremely strong heavy tank. Now statistically posted, if both of these vehicles are running calibrated shells, which would give the AMX M4 326 millimeters of premium penetration, and it would give the IS-4 with its heat shells 374, this vehicle carrying AP. Statistically, if you were just to look at the numbers alone, the IS-4 has got about 50 millimeters more of base penetration, which is fantastic when you think about it. That means that every time the IS-4 should be able to easily pen me, and I should not be able to pen the IS-4, judging that its base armor is just about 315, and that angle there, I shouldn't be able to pen any part. But what you'll see here is that, boom, right through that frontal armor, and the IS-4 actually bounces right off of my upper plate. So this is a good example to show that armor is a lot weirder than you think it is on the values that they carry. Even though the premium AP on this vehicle seems like it's got a very bad penetration value, we cut right through his frontal armor there, no problem whatsoever. 3 shells, no problem. So now we can make our way and load onto Armor Inspector and show just a better in-depth value on how penetration really works in game, and it is really, really cool. So this is an IS-4 being aimed at with an IS-4 using calibrated, just like we kind of were with the AMX M4. So what calibrated shells does is it boosts heat penetration, I think 30%, and APCR and AP about 10%, or it's something like that, where it boosts the heat a lot more than it boosts the AP. And you may think that that gives Heat an unfair advantage over the AP shells, but Wargaming actually worked this out, so it's a pretty even balance. And the reason for that being is, as you can see here, Heat, when aiming at the upper plate of an IS-4 using all the 6 degrees of gun depression it has, is 390 millimeters thick, which means there's no way you're ever going to penetrate that with the 374 millimeters of standard pen you have on your Heat with Cali. So yeah, you're just never going to pen that upper plate. It is way too thick to cut through. However, if we were to go get a vehicle like the AMX M454, which only has about 326 millimeters of premium penetration, watch this. You actually have a much higher chance of penetrating right through that IS-4's upper plate. In fact, a 95% chance to get through it, because it's only about 320 millimeters effective of armor. Yeah, kind of weird how it works. So the reason AP has a much higher chance of penning through the IS-4's upper plate is because it has an aspect called shell normalization. So let's say you're aiming at this flat piece of armor. Now, to make this armor flat, you would have to aim at it like this, which of course would make the armor a lot weaker, only sitting at 160 millimeters than it would if you were aiming at it like this. And of course, the reason for that being is because if it's at an angle, it has to cut through more armor at that angle than it would if you were just looking right through a flat punch. It's very simple on that number. So the more you angle it, the more effective armor you have on that plate, and that's what makes the IS-4 such a strong vehicle, is the really good angles. Well, since AP has a shell normalization, which means that when it hits the armor, this angle, let's say, it's actually going to turn that shell about 5 degrees less angled on the armor. So instead of like this, it's going to come in like this and make the armor, that little bit of an angle there, as you saw, made the armor go from 270 to the 222. So just a little bit of an angle can take off 50 to 60 millimeters of armor, and that's why AP does such a fantastic job of cutting through angled armor and making what you would think have a Heat a massive advantage, but actually AP has a much better advantage on getting through thick armor in certain scenarios. So that's why AP has a much lesser buff than Heat on the calibrated aspect. Now, another really weird thing, though, is that AP and APCR have shell normalization, but they also lose penetration over distance because, of course, they're slowing down over a period of time, losing their penetration, where Heat does not actually. Heat stands for high explosive anti-tank shells, and Heat actually has a lot of different aspects that are very, very strong. strong. So if we go over to the IS-4 here, heat is a really cool aspect because you'll see that it actually has a much higher penetration angle. So this angle here, the heat can penetrate through very, very easily. In fact, you can see here that we can just get this angle. That's a pretty steep angle. And in fact, if we were to swap it and get out, let's say, AP shells, you would see that AP, no any chance, can get through the side of that IS-4. And the reason for that being, or not the side of the IS-4, the AMX, and the reason for that being is because that AP ricochets at a 72-degree angle. That means anything over 72 degrees, AP will not cut through, which is not great for AP. Heat has got 80 degrees, which is impressive, very, very impressive. That means that pretty much heat can cut through almost a 90-degree angle. Even at like this angle, if you have the penetration with heat, you can pretty much cut right through it, which is very, very impressive from heat shells. Heat also doesn't lose any penetration over distance because it's a high explosive ammunition. So pretty much when it hits the enemy target, it will actually create this super hot, like almost spread of gas that burns through the enemy tank's armor in a chemical reaction. That's actually something I love with heat. It's really cool. But that's why it actually doesn't lose any penetration over distance. And that's also why if it hits a wall or it hits a fence, it'll just break on the fence because the chemical reaction goes on that. So heat has a lot of disadvantages on the fact that it can't really cut through spaced armor, that its shell velocity is usually a lot worse, and as well the base penetration, even though it is statistically posted higher than premium rounds like APCR and AP, it still doesn't work as well. Now, I will say the worst premium round is usually APCR, and the reason for that being, if we were to go get out a vehicle with premium APCR, let's say like the Super Conqueror. Now, I will say the Super Conqueror's APCR is actually fantastic. If we were to go pull up an IS-4 once again here, you will see that a Super Conqueror's premium APCR isn't enough to cut through the IS-4's upper plate. That is a good example here. It's about 356 millimeters thick on the upper plate. And the reason for APCR struggling more is because it only has 3 degrees of shell normalization while AP has 5. So this loses a massive amount of pen over the AP. That 2 degrees, as you can see, takes off about 20 millimeters of armor, which just makes it so the Super Conq cannot penetrate an IS-4. But the great thing about the Super Conqueror and the FE Toon 5B is that they have very, very good premium round characteristics as it is and are able to cut through a lot of armor, as you can see, quite easily. But the issue with APCR is not only does it lose a massive amount of penetration over distance, but as well, APCR has a lot less penetration normally. It's because, as we know, heat has a lot of pen on vehicles like the WZ-113, the E-100, the IS-4. They're all sitting at around 360 to 370 millimeters of penetration. And APCR doesn't have the highest advantage of shell normalization on the pen. So what happens is you're really just sitting at a value that's only about 10 millimeters more, and only vehicles like the Super Conqueror that have such good premium penetration rounds are able to cut through. When you get a vehicle like the enemy IS-7, yeah, an IS-7, if we're going to pull that up, an IS-7 struggles so much to cut through the frontal armor of an IS-4. Like you can see here, it's not great. It can't penetrate through an IS-4 at all. In fact, you'd probably have a higher chance just using AP and just angling it like this and penetrating with the IS-7, because as you can see, it makes the armor a lot less effective. So these are a bunch of values on talking about how premium AP, APCR, and everything else like that works in the game. Now, of course, heat has a lot of values that aren't really worth breaking into, like how it loses a lot of penetration going into spaced armor. Just don't bother shooting heat into spaced armor. It really doesn't work. You're not going to penetrate a heat shell on the tracks of a vehicle. It's never going to work. But there are certain characteristics that a lot of people really don't know about, like the 3 calibers rule. The 3 calibers rule is one of the most important aspects in the game, and a perfect example of it would be to get up the AMX-50B. Now, the AMX-50B is actually a very, very cool vehicle because it works perfectly in this equation. So if we're to go pull out, let's say, the Chieftain Mark 6, which carries a 120 millimeter armament. Now, the AMX-50B side armor here, as you can see, is 32 millimeters thick. In fact, a better example of this would even be the Bat Chatillon 25T because it's sitting at thicker armor than the AMX. So as you can see here, the Bat Chat side armor is actually an auto ricochet. If you're sitting at a steep enough angle, as I did say, APCR and AP will ricochet at 72 degrees of armor, which means that you cannot penetrate, even though this armor is only 40 millimeters, you cannot penetrate this armor just because it will hit the side and skid right off, as you can see here, a perfect example. So what you need to do is on the 3 calibers rule, if your shell is 3 times the caliber of the armor, so that means that because this here is 40 millimeters, you need to have 40 millimeters times 3 plus 1, and you'll be able to penetrate every single time, no matter what, on the angle of the bat chat. So here we go. This is the Chieftain Mark 6 not able to penetrate, but if we go and pull out, let's say, the IS-4, which carries a 122mm armament, as you can see, every single angle is a 100% chance of penetrating, and it's only 2mm more on a caliber. So that's a perfect example to show how the 3 calibers rule works. You can penetrate the side of the bat chat TO-25T with a 122, but you cannot with a 120mm, and it's something that's very, very cool. So the 3 calibers rule works great on any AP shells. It doesn't work as well on heat, and it also doesn't, as you can see here, doesn't work at all on heat, because heat doesn't do the shell normalization. It only works for AP and APCR. It also doesn't work for high explosive, because again, that is a high explosive as heat is a high explosive shell. They both don't penetrate. So that's something that's very cool. 3 calibers rule is one of my favorite aspects in the game, because you can really be smart and overmatch a lot of armor if you know how to work it. Like the sides of a 50B, every single shell pretty much at tier 10 will overmatch the sides of a 50B. Now finally we have high explosive. Now HE is a pretty cool aspect, pretty much because it just follows a base rule. If it has enough penetration, it will penetrate on the enemy armor. So if we were to load HE here, you can see all of the HE values, and it looks kind of weird when you look at it, but pretty much you can penetrate HE on the lower plate of a vehicle like the Batchat TO-25T, rolling 375 to 625 with your IS-4, which is of course very, very good. But at the same time, if you're hitting this part of armor, which is only 154mm thick, because the HE does not have enough penetration, only sitting at, if we have the value up, 68mm of pen here, it's obviously not going to cut through 155mm. HE works the same way that heat does. It sits at a base pen value. So the IS-4's upper plate would be about 400mm thick if you were aiming at it with high explosive, so it would never penetrate. But the really cool thing about HE is that it sends a whole bunch of clusters out, kind of like a shrapnel bomb, and it tries to find the weakest bit of armor. So if you shot here, what would actually happen is that you can see that different values have a lot more and less damage. So if you were to shoot here, it's going to do 106 to 229 average damage. But if you can see, you shoot closer to this little bit of flat armor here, it's actually going to deal more damage. And the reason for that being is because that HE tries to find the weakest part of armor. So even though this whole plate here is the exact same thickness, because this plate here is a lot less thick, only sitting at around 50mm, the HE is going to spread out over to this part and all try and penetrate the weakest part of armor. It's a really cool equation that I find fantastic, and it's something that shows how HE really works, and it's something that I personally love. So HE has a lot of really cool values going for it here, but pretty much the way I say HE is that if your base penetration can't get through it, don't bother shooting it, because it's just not going to pen. So that's why the British tanks, like the Chieftain Mark 6, the Badger actually doesn't get HE, sadly. Wargaming, please add HE to the Badger. But, yeah, the Badger would get HE, and pretty much, it has HE, but Hesh is fantastic because it has the ability to easily cut through any HE-able spots on vehicles a lot better than other tanks. But hopefully you enjoyed today's video. I wanted to talk about a lot of the aspects on armor, penetration, shell normalization, and everything else like that. It's something that's fantastic, and I feel a lot of people should know. Helps them out massively. Hopefully this video wasn't too boring. As always, if you want to see more like this, please let me know in the comments down below. But other than that, hopefully all of you are doing well out there. Please consider smashing that subscribe button down below, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.